While I was writing my Osmosis Jones video about how the movie Osmosis Jones unintentionally reproduces a fascist framework for understanding the concept of health, I got distracted by the citation needed tag in the Wikipedia article for Osmosis Jones where it says that the movie was originally given a PG-13 rating by the MPAA, but then they recut it to knock it down to PG. Roger Ebert casually mentions this in his review of Osmosis Jones, but he didn't really seem like the most reliable citation for that kind of insider industry info at the time, so I went Googling to see if I could find a more compelling source, and instead I found this Christian media review website with the extremely generic name Movie Guide, which honestly kind of feels like it's a crisis pregnancy center, but for movie reviews. Like, you think you're just getting a normal secular service, but then actually when you get there, it's all evangelicals with no medical credentials catfishing you into thinking that abortion is the greatest tragedy of contemporary life. So at first glance, I assumed this was just a common sense media knockoff where it has a kind of generically American puritanical attitude towards sex and violence, but in a way that's inoffensive enough if it's just presented in the context of keeping parents informed about what they're showing to their children. But then I got to this part of the Osmosis Jones review. Slight pagan worldview, which avoids talking about God, though not in a humanist way, with some moral elements and some politically correct preachiness about health matters. Naturally, my first thought was, wow, that is absolutely nuts and bananas, and my second thought was, I wonder if this website has a review of Hereditary. And I have great news. They do. So today, I just want to talk about this weird evangelical review of Ari Aster's Toni Collette Scream compilation, because, to be honest, it wasn't what I expected. Hereditary is one half family drama and one half supernatural horror. It follows a family that is plagued by demonic entities following the death of its abusive matriarch, and while trying to process her grief, the main character Annie uncovers the ways that a satanic cult has been manipulating her and her children. So, from the jump, Hereditary gets the lowest possible rating of -4, which is only one worse than Osmosis Jones's -3, and this is a great start. From a purely Christian point of view, Hereditary, which is a graphically violent horror movie about a family torn apart by generational trauma, is only 1 point worse than the animated movie where a white blood cell makes fart jokes inside Bill Murray. And with Movie Guide's note of Hereditary's intentional blasphemy, evil, gross immorality, and/or worldview problems to be avoided, I was ready to settle cozily into some proselytizing about Hereditary's implicit support of Satanism by way of a flimsy misreading of the plot. But I was mistaken. Although the review purports in its summary that Hereditary is a movie to be avoided, everything else about the review seems to be fighting against that core foundation. Movie Guide calls this high-quality horror right off the bat with a vague but not unwarranted nod to its beautiful sets, intriguing camera moves, lighting, and scoring. Astute viewers may have already noticed that Hereditary actually received 4 stars in its production value rating here, and this is the highest possible score in that category. See, it turns out that this website actually has 2 ranking systems. The first one on the content is the more important one, but they also give a secondary rating for a movie's quality. However, the site explains, a 4-star production rating does not guarantee that the movie will meet our criteria for what makes a truly fine, much less great work of art. That kind of criteria depends a lot on one's moral and spiritual values, issues that our acceptability ratings are meant to address. So, I thought, in my naivete, maybe it isn't that remarkable for Movie Guide to begrudgingly concede some overwhelmingly slick technical elements while still misrepresenting the narrative content of a film as being fundamentally immoral. After all, extremely Christian movies like M. Night Shyamalan's entire filmography vary morally from extreme caution to abhorrent, while Air Bud, a film in which a dog is repeatedly smacked in the face with a basketball as part of an idolatrous sports ritual, receives passing marks, and a 3 out of 4 in production value. But Movie Guide goes on. After giving a laundry list of inherently offensive behaviors depicted in Hereditary, such as postmodern morality, someone being covered by thousands of ants, nudity on a miniature model, and light miscellaneous immorality including a hit-and-run car accident, the review takes a gentler turn. In telling a story about how someone can be imprisoned by loved ones who have left, Movie Guide reports, Hereditary almost seems to be two in one. A story not only about a cult of naked old people implanting their demon god into the bodies of unwitting children, but also about how grief and trauma too can be passed across generations. Not unlike the demon god. Movie Guide follows the allegory here. It sees the ways that the literal, supernatural events of the story intersect with a real-world, relatable emotional narrative. When Annie's clothes start burning as she throws her dead daughter's cursed sketchbook into the fire, it's not just demonic possession. It also stands for the real pain that comes with giving up the belongings of someone you've lost. Analogies are not lost on Movie Guide. That is, until they are. Movie Guide can see that the occult is a metaphor, that it stands for pain and trauma and the hurt that families can do to each other, and that isn't exactly a revelation. For all Ari Aster's clever Easter eggs, he's not an especially oblique screenwriter, but it's not exactly an idea I'd expect to be immediately followed by some more evangelical nonsense. Make no mistake, though, Hereditary is a very dark movie with nary a redemptive moment. With depictions of occult practices and even full but shadowy frontal nudity of both men and women engaged in ritualistic activity, this movie can hardly be recommended. The occult is just a metaphor, but that metaphor is totally eclipsed under these full moons. Still, all this moralizing isn't too far off from that pervasive idea that depiction equals endorsement, which isn't an interpretive issue restricted to a solely Christian lens, so I guess I could have written this off as a simple disagreement over matters of taste if it weren't for Movie Guide's next point. Hereditary offers an intriguing apophatic encounter with the divine. For example, though they seem positive at first, the occult practices in the movie eventually are depicted for what they truly are, demonic. As a result, the question of where God is never recedes totally from the viewer's mind. This question naturally arises in the face of so much human despair and loss, not to mention the occult activity in the story. In the negative space that the movie creates where God is not, is just the place where God is. The negative space leads to encountering God through encountering what God is not. During the movie's most heinous crime, the rejection of the Trinity, God's presence nearly shouts through the darkness. This demonic inversion answers the opening question: what can tear a family apart? Answer: separation from divine love. Shortly after making this insight, the review comes to an abrupt end and reiterates that Hereditary is nothing more than an abhorrent story with excessive foul language and violence. But didn't they have you going for a minute there? I mean, I was really ready to accept that Hereditary, a movie that delights in depicting Toni Collette's character sawing off her own head in a cute little callback to her own daughter's earlier beheading, is actually deeply invested in the omnipotence of the Christian God, because this isn't just some more evangelical nonsense. This is a cogent analysis. In some narratives, especially those centering nefarious pagan religious practices, maybe God's absence can be felt so profoundly that it reminds us of his presence. So why isn't that enough to propel Hereditary to the Protestant Oscars? I don't know if you've seen the movie Death Proof, but it's pretty disgusting. If you haven't seen it and you can stomach gore and Quentin Tarantino, then I'd actually recommend it. Even Movie Guide, in its review of the shorter cut of the film included in Grindhouse, admits that it is interesting and provocative and, most importantly, has less swears than Planet Terror. But without giving too much away, Death Proof makes an important narrative decision about revenge. In order to depict the commission of brutal violence as redemptive, it must first drag you slowly and painfully through the physical and emotional torture that precedes that revenge. You have to care so deeply about someone being hurt so cruelly that when the villain is punished for inflicting that hurt, they can be treated with no humanity. See, sometimes it can be uncomfortable to watch someone get what we think that they deserve. Even Quentin Tarantino sometimes takes shortcuts here by making the villains in his movies actual historical villains, like Nazis or the Manson family. We're already primed to see these characters not as people, but as pure caricatures of pathological evil, so yeah, you can cut off their scalps or burn them to death. It's all pretty much palatable by default. Otherwise, though, you'd have to be a little bit more judicious. If your villain is just some guy, even if that guy is a big meanie, you still can't show him suffering too much for his sins. It's hard to watch people be punished, and if the audience feels too sorry for the guy, they'll end up craving a redemption arc, or worse, a redemption prequel. But Death Proof so desperately wants you to see some guy suffer for a full 10 minutes and for you to not feel a moment's hesitation in your pure unbridled joy at his suffering. Like any good slasher, Death Proof has to build so much tension to justify the finale's ecstatic release. And even though Movie Guide isn't a fan of Death Proof, it does have some fondness for the era of horror that it harkens back to. In its pan of Wes Craven's classic horror satire Scream, Movie Guide laments that while Scream is beyond reproach for its genre bending, a weak defense could be built to endorse classic horror movies, because many showed that an untimely death would meet fornicators. So you heard it here first, folks. Teens getting impaled to death after losing their virginity, that's what Ted Baehr likes to see. And in the review for Ari Aster's second film, Midsommar, Movie Guide even insists that the horror genre in fiction is not necessarily anathema to Christian values. After all, the Bible has its share of horrors.
In the Bible, angels came to your doorstep. Fathers offered their children up to be sacrificed. Fishes multiplied. Cities burned. The horror movie progression of the plagues in Exodus riveted me. The blood, the frogs, the boils, the locusts, the darkness. I was taught that the violence of Christianity came with great safety. Under a pleasing shroud of aesthetic mystery, there were clear prescriptions about who you should be.
But to an evangelical reading, Hereditary is all tension and no release. The innocent, normally spared in horror movies to live out the rest of their days, I guess with severe PTSD, are brutally punished regardless of the ethical choices they make, and not one virgin survives to knock down the evil villain who doles out death and plays God. Although it reveals God's image in negative, Hereditary never explicitly mentions God or Christianity or provides any figure to act as a conduit for divine grace. And so the story is simply incomplete without the message of Jesus' salvation. The few moments of relief in Hereditary turn out to be more cult pranks. Compare this to The Conjuring 2, which has a happy ending where the Christian faith expels Sister Jeff the Killer and Dollar Tree Slender Man, earning it 3 discussion questions at the end of its Movie Guide review. Of course, the ending of Hereditary, the triumph of a listless demon thanks to his devoted cult of geriatric followers, isn't meant to be taken literally. Of course, it's a metaphor for the ways that a family can be twisted up and torn apart by the complex intermingling of abuse and grief. And of course, even if we weren't taking it literally, this wouldn't be an endorsement of demons. But to end here would imply that this one family was beyond God's saving. And that's something Movie Guide can't tolerate. So the goal of Movie Guide isn't to give a Christian perspective on films, to help guide an individual or family's personal reflections and interpretations, but to protect children and teenagers and maybe even adults from the corrupting influence of things that are not Christian enough. If anything, Hereditary presents a compelling case against letting your grief push you away from God and towards what Movie Guide would term a pagan worldview, but only Ted Baehr is qualified to make this analysis. For everyone else, it's too dangerous to come face to face with the struggle against sin. But more than just denying Movie Guide readers the chance to make their own choices, this is setting them up for failure by denying them the opportunity to rehearse any social situations that might threaten their relationship with God. It's like, rather than guiding people through difficult situations that might lead to doubt, they're just demanding that you avoid doubt at all costs, that you repress that entire part of your human experience. And it's not that horror movies are actually giving us important lessons in how to behave when confronted by demons or serial murderers, but movies, like any stories, permit us to get inside the heads of other people and look around for a while, even as those heads are getting sawed off. Movie Guide seems to think that you should only get inside the head of someone who is already like you and who knows the same things as you do, and that head should most assuredly not be getting sawed off. Unless you're a fornicator,